Hi everyone, and welcome to the first episode in my new series on Christianity and anime. Some of y'all will remember there was one before this, but unfortunately it was removed due to copyright infringement. It was just a very short video with some text commentary on the anime clip at the end. But copyright holders removed it, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that except appeal it. But in this case, it was a little bit shaky, so I didn't really feel like doing that. I'm just going to stick with ones that have more of my own commentary, like videos like this. So, anyway, moving on. As y'all know from the title, this is about the argument for God's existence from beauty, also known as the aesthetic argument, as it very briefly appears in an episode of an anime called Witch Hunter Robin. Just briefly about the series. It's about a witch hunter named Robin, of course, who is also a nun, raised in a monastery, who has the power of pyrokinesis, which is basically the ability to look at something and light it on fire by using your mind. And she's sent by her organization, which is called Solomon. It's a global witch hunting organization who has some kind of relationship with the Catholic Church, but exactly what that is hard to ascertain, whether it's an organization within the church or apart from the church that just collaborates with it or whatever, but it's something. And anyway, that's just about it. Basically, it follows her adventures with the STNJ, which is the Japan branch of Solomon. She's sent there by the main headquarters to investigate some of the practices that they do. For example, they don't kill witches like the rest of the organization does. They capture them and send them to a research facility. So that's kind of strange to the people at headquarters, and she's being sent to work with them as well as give them information on exactly what's going on there. So moving on to the clip, I'll go ahead and show that in a second, but just briefly, there's not a whole lot of spoilers in this one. It takes place in episode 4, and it's kind of inconsequential. What they talk about kind of gives you an insight into her life, but it's not that big of a deal. So I'll see you all on the flip side for analysis.
It's rather good. Huh? You've captured the mood well. I was just curious, that's all, about what kind of picture you were painting.
I was curious too. I was curious about you. It seems you're here every morning.
And so I am, for a little prayer time.
For prayer? Then you believe in God?
It's sort of a habit.
I see. Well, I believe in him. Because he was the one who brought me into such an incredibly beautiful world. And that's why I'm preserving it like this. The world as its beautiful self. My name is Sayoko.
Huh? Oh, hello, my name's Robin.
Robin? What a beautiful name.
Okay, so as you just saw, Robin completed her morning prayer and got into a discussion with a lady named Sayoko. This scene is interesting for two reasons. First of all, it gives us our first insight into Robin's faith. Before this, we would assume that it's at least reasonably strong because she is a monastic and she was raised in a monastery, and we just got done seeing her pray in a church. But by her own admission here, we notice that this is, at this point at least, influenced by habit more than faith. And I don't think that necessarily means that she disbelieves or that she has any feelings of agnosticism or anything. For the simple reason that if I had her ability and could just look at something and cause it to burst into flames, and if I used that ability to hunt witches who also had magical powers, I would probably have a hard time denying the existence of God. But just because you do believe that God exists 100% doesn't mean that your faith life is always going to be filled with beauty and devotion, and so whatever. Moving on from there, in response to that, Sayako makes the claim that, well, I believe in God because He's the one who brought me into this incredibly beautiful world. That's a very basic argument from beauty. So I'm going to go on and explain some of the different types of arguments from beauty. My source is an article called Aesthetic Arguments for the Existence of God by a man named Peter Williams. It's very good. If you want to get a more in-depth explanation of these arguments, you should look there. But I'm just going to give a brief overview here. There are two different types of, two different categories of aesthetic argument. The first is epistemological. The second is ontological. Epistemological arguments seek to start with our ability to perceive beauty, whereas ontological arguments start with the existence of beauty itself, and they both try to prove God as a result of these things. So there are four different arguments that he gives, and he just calls them A, B, C, and D. So argument A seeks to interpret subjective experiences of beauty as revelatory of divinity. So, for example, you look out the window, you see something beautiful, you feel awe, you feel wonder. A person using this argument would explain that feeling as a revelation of God, a miniature revelation of God. So, moving on, B sees our ability to perceive beauty as more easily explained by theism rather than naturalism. So, in other words, this is using God as a best explanation for our ability to perceive beauty, because perceiving beauty doesn't help us survive in the grand scheme of things, and that's how naturalism tends to explain things, by how they enhance our ability to survive. So argument C is similar to it, except it starts with objective beauty itself, and it says that the objective beauty we see in the world is more easily explained with reference to theism than with reference to naturalism. So the last argument, argument D, provides God as the source and standard of all objective beauty we see in the world. This is a very ancient argument. It goes all the way back to Plato, and it basically says that in the world, when we see beauty, it's changeable, and it's not perfect. So therefore, it kind of awakens in us a longing for something, pure and unadulterated and perfectly beautiful. And the fact that the imperfect beauty exists is kind of a proof that a perfect beauty exists, which is the standard by which we can judge that imperfect beauty in the world. And when Christ came, the church, after Christ came, the church was pleased to reappropriate this argument and use it to prove the existence of God. And Augustine uses this argument, St. Augustine, in his work, The City of God. And he even references its kind of oldness, I think, when he talks about these people who, knew that beauty had to exist in a more pure form or something. But anyway, I'll go ahead and read the quote. It says, "This consideration has readily persuaded men of ability and learning, that the original idea of beauty is not to be found in this sphere, where it is shown to be subject to change. And so they saw that there must be some being in which the original form resides, unchangeable, and therefore incomparable. And they rightly believe that it is there that the origin of things is to be found, in the uncreated, which is the source of all creation, therefore God." So, anyway, anyone even mildly familiar with the scriptures will recognize that the claims of these arguments are affirmed by the biblical writers, whether it's the psalmist saying the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament showeth the work of his hands, or it's St. Paul in Romans 1 saying that all of mankind knows that God exists because his invisible attributes and Godhead are seen clearly in the things that are made. So anyway, going back quickly to the anime, Sayako's claim, if we reformulated it as a premise and conclusion follows: I live in an incredibly beautiful world. Therefore, God exists as the one who both created it and brought me into it. Simplified further, we would say, there is beauty, therefore God exists. So like I said, very simple, very basic claim. However, it does fit more specifically with one of these arguments, and that argument, I would say, is argument D. So, and as for why, it seems like she is grounding her belief in God in the existence of beauty itself. Therefore, it is ontological, not really basing it, at least originally, on her ability to perceive beauty. Though, of course, they imply each other. If you can tell that objective beauty exists, you obviously have the ability to perceive beauty. But anyway, if we go with her simplified claim, or my simplification of it, there is beauty, therefore God exists, why does that follow from its premise? Why does that conclusion, God exists, follow from that premise? The reason would be is if you kind of imply, go by implication, and you connect the dots, you would say that God exists as the standard and source of that beauty. He creates the world. He is the perfect world. You look around you and you see imperfect, lesser beauty. Therefore, you would come to the conclusion that it reflects the glory of the invisible God who is beautiful, just as the lesser light of the moon reflects the light of the sun. So anyway, by looking at the great beauty around her, Sayako knows in her heart that even greater and perfect beauty exists, and that beauty is what men call God. So that's essentially her claim. She doesn't say a whole lot, so we can not be fully sure if that's the claim she's making. And she's very casual about it too. It's not like they get into a debate here, so there was no way we were going to know fully what she's trying to say here. But it does seem to fit mostly with argument D, because she's seeing God as the source of that beauty. Anyway, regardless of what argument she uses, however, this scene is especially intriguing, and the reasons are because we aren't surprised necessarily that Catholicism is used in this anime. As I mentioned in my introductory video, Catholicism is used all the time in anime as, just kind of an exotic flavoring, or sometimes even seriously. But, so we aren't exactly surprised that Robin is a nun. We aren't surprised that she prays in a church. But we are surprised when she walks out of that church and ends up meeting another Japanese woman who happens to be a theist, and who very casually and very nonchalantly invokes a very ancient argument for God's existence. So that's interesting, and also what's even more interesting is the fact that she uses her artistic beauty, her artistic ability, to preserve that beauty as kind of a gesture of thanks and worship and praise of God. So she's not even like a humanistic painter or anything that would just kind of say, oh, this is so beautiful, so I'll paint it, and it's just so beautiful, and it's just so beautiful. And you kind of get stuck in this idolatrous circle where you're worshiping the beauty because it's beautiful, and, worshiping the creature as the creator, as St. Paul says in Romans 1 as well. So, but she actually uses she says, beauty exists, and this is beautiful, and I love it, therefore I'm going to worship the unchangeable, immortal, eternal, and beautiful God who created this. So that's very interesting that was in an anime. Anyway, just some concluding remarks. If you're an atheist that happens to watch this video, no, this is not a joke. People actually do argue from beauty, and lots of people are actually convinced by it. For example, Peter Hitchens, brother of Christopher Hitchens, his soul was first stirred when he saw a painting of the Last Judgment, and I'll reference his interview here. I'll put it in an annotation. But basically, he ended up going back to his Christian roots after some more careful study. But his soul was first stirred by an experience of beauty, and that's just what that is. And I don't really have time to talk about too much more. But my very own Catholic priest was an atheist from the time he was a freshman in high school. And he eventually experienced great beauty in Princeton's chapel, and the chapel of Princeton University. And he was so stirred by it, he ended up saying from the depths of his soul, "I know you're not there," addressing himself to God. And so he screamed and ran out, but eventually, through careful study, he was baptized in Anglican, and eventually became a Catholic and was ordained a priest. So that's really cool. And I thank y'all for watching this. I hope you enjoyed my attempt at philosophy. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.